Weapons to use in the war. The top Chinese diplomat is in Moscow now for talks, and the Wall Street Journal reports China's president is planning a trip to Russia in the coming months. This as another congressional delegation goes to Taiwan months after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's trip angered China.
U.S. and China tense weeks of accusations of a suspected spy balloon. China claims the breakaway island as its own to be taken by force if necessary, and this trip will be seen as a fine gesture.
The Supreme Court is hearing a big free speech case, and we'll hear another one tomorrow, challenging legal protection social media companies get over content. Today's case
involving 23-year-old Nohemi Gonzalez, who was killed in 2015 in Paris as part of an ISIS attack. Her family sued Google, Facebook, and Twitter in 2016, arguing all three allowed extremist content from ISIS-related groups.
Fox's David Spud. The housing market keeps slowing down. Previously, the home sales dropped in January for 12 months, the slowest pace since October 2010. America's listening to Fox News.
Buy auto insurance. Freeway has you covered. Freeway has great low rates for auto insurance as low as 99 cents a day. Say goodbye to overpriced rates and start saving today. Freeway has hundreds of options to choose from. Let Freeway help you find the coverage that fits your needs. Freeway is available online, by phone, or in person. With rates as low as 99 cents a day, you can save hundreds a year. Tap the link below or go to freewayinsurance.com for a fast, free quote. Freeway, timing savings.
Odyssey's I'm Listening is our commitment to mental health conversations. Dr. Ursula Woods talks about teen relationships taking our mental health.
You actually have control over that. There's going to be some amount that no matter what, you're going to be in pain and have to go through. But if you let your brain spend all the time thinking about how great they were and how perfect and all that prevents you from moving through this and having a new life.
Talk saves lives. For more mental health conversations, visit imlistening.org.
The medical center is opening in a contaminated Ohio town, getting more attention and help. Crushing some cars in the parking lot. A year after a baby formula recall, an Abbott Labs plant shut down that led to a shortage. Another recall from a different company.
Crockett was recalling 145,000 cans of baby formula because of a possible cross-contamination with Proteobacter sakazaki. That's a bacterium that causes a rare but potentially deadly infection that affects newborn babies. Crockett says its recall was issued under an abundance of caution and affects some batches of Pro-Sobi 12.9-ounce simply plant-based infant formula. The products in the recall were manufactured between August and September of 2022 and distributed to stores nationwide, as well as in Guam, Puerto Rico. The company says it has not received any reports of illnesses or adverse effects tied to the recalled products. Anya Powers, Fox News.
There is a big sell-off at the stock market. The Dow is plunging 480 points. The NASDAQ is losing 200. I'm Dave Anthony. This is Fox News.
Whether your dog is in their puppy, adult, or senior years, there's nothing better than more years together. And the best way to feed their happy, healthy life is with fresh, healthy food. The Farmer's Dog makes it easy to keep your best friend healthy inside and out with fresh recipes made from real meat and veggies. They're pre-portioned just for your pup and delivered right to your door. Help your dog live a healthy life and get 50% off your first box of real fresh food at thefarmersdog.com/betteryears23.
Hi, I'm Martha Stewart, and I have a question for you. You know that unwelcome guest everyone wishes would just leave already? That's COVID-19. That's why I got an updated booster designed to help protect against recent Omicron variants. Got it? Check eligibility and schedule your updated COVID booster at vaccines.gov. Sponsored by Pfizer and BioNTech.
From high atop Fox News headquarters in New York City, always seeking solutions, never sowing division. It's Brian Kilmeade.
Thanks so much for being here, everybody. It's the Brian Kilmeade Show, coming to you from 48th and 6th in Midtown Manhattan. Heard around the country, around the world. We're watching, we know, within probably a half hour. We're going to hear from the President of the United States speaking over in Poland. We heard Vladimir Putin about 4 in the morning Eastern time, ran for 90 minutes, in many ways just delusional, separated from the facts. We're not sure if he really thinks this stuff or if he is just feeding an audience that he thinks is that gullible, blaming us for starting the war. Okay, that'll go over big. And now he does. One thing is real and is consequential. There's a lot that is real, but one of which he's going to suspend adhering to the new START agreement, which he was breaking and busting anyway. And the President Biden said, I'll just go back into it, it'll be fine. Josh Rogan standing by, and we'll be joined by Carol Markowitz at the bottom of the hour, New York Post columnist, talks about the forthcoming book, Stolen Youth, that comes out, talks about what happened during COVID to America's next generation. So let's get to the big three.
Now, with the stories you need to know, it's Brian's Big Three.
Number 3.
There is a turning coming in the economy. I know our employment numbers were very high last month. I know the inflation numbers have been coming down for a while, but the new inflation numbers, the 1 monthly numbers, the future of the economy is not going along well.
According to Art Laffer, but I know the numbers say the economy is recovering, recession not happening. But as he was referring to, prices, wages, inflation, and layoffs are heading in the wrong direction. In retail, they're really being just cratering. Big box stores laying off and closing. The numbers are staggering, but they don't figure in the macro economy. How's your wallet doing?
Number 2.
We're looking at potentially having, we already have Nikki Haley who's announced, but potentially Senator Tim Scott, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. If it's a crowded field, it does seem like that could work in Trump's favor.
Maybe. We'll see. We'll talk about it too. Taking shape. The 2024 field is emerging. DeSantis tours. Haley is in Iowa. Pence to South Carolina. Trump to East Palestine. And by the way, Tim Scott on a listening tour. We'll go through it.
Number 1.
The responsibility for that is fully on the United States. They want to deliver us a strategic defeat while crawling into our strategic nuclear objectives. Regarding this, I have to say that Russia suspends its participation in the New START treaty.
Biden's visit to Kyiv was great, but what happens now will define if this war will be a success for Ukraine and the West. The need, F-16s and ATACMS, is now no joke. A massive plan to replenish our stocks, weapon stocks have to be put in place. There is a window of support. There's no election right now. No question the Americans will probably give him a year. Mr. President, do not screw it up. Joining us now is Josh Rogan. Josh, I know you don't get up at 4 in the morning, especially coming out of Munich, but you must have seen some of the highlights from Vladimir Putin's speech. What's your takeaway?
You know, same lies, different day, okay? It's like gaslighting that only works if you're willing to be gaslit or if there's no other source of information. I think they're directed mostly at the Russian people who are living in a cocoon of horrendous Russian propaganda, and a lot of them will have no choice or decide to believe that, but it doesn't really get us anywhere in terms of like understanding what Putin's about, except for the fact that these are the same lies that he's been pushing for all this time. And you know, the New START treaty, it's a shame. It's probably, you know, like, but in the end, you know, if he wasn't following it anyway, then him withdrawing for it doesn't really mean anything. And the bottom line is that he's going to continue to fight, and I think time is not on Ukraine's side, and that's why I think I agree with you that, you know, in addition to President Biden showing up in Ukraine, he ought to show up with some yes answers to some of the most pressing questions that the Ukrainians have right now. I was in Munich for the last 4 days with Tony Blinken and Kamala Harris, you know, 50 senators and congressmen and Ukrainian lawmakers all said the same thing. They're like, time is not on our side, and stop saying that. They don't like it when the Biden people say, we'll help you for as long as it takes. They're like, as long as it takes, That's not the right message. How about let's get this done quick so that less Ukrainians die in the war?
That's so interesting because I've never heard that before. Because of course, the longest it takes is to turn off to America too, because they see $113 billion, so it doesn't work. I understand what his point is, but the thing is, if it comes to bloodletting, they have more blood to shed. So here's what Vladimir Putin said. This is one of the most astounding things. Cut 3.
Responsibility for fomenting the Ukrainian conflict, for its escalation, and for the increasing number of victims lies entirely with Western elites. And, of course, the current regime in Kyiv, for which the Ukrainian people are essentially strangers.
Really? Okay. Cut 5. No, make that cut 4.
What's important is that our...
I want to repeat, it's they who have started the war. We have used and are using force to stop it. The West deployed not only military, information, but also an economic front against us, but achieved and will achieve nothing, nowhere.
The West started the war? I mean, even Russia can't buy that.
Right, no, it's crazy talk, but I mean, it's not to say that Putin's insane. He's saying it for a reason. He's a rational but evil human being, so he's, you know, again, just offering anyone who has no choice or really wants to swallow his propaganda something to swallow. You know what I mean? Like it's so. Anyone who exists in the world of knowledge knows that the Russians attacked Ukraine, but you know, he might as well come up with the story. It's a shame that this is like the best that he could do because it's pretty weak sauce. But I mean, what I think again, when I was in Munich, what the Ukrainians were saying, okay, this is what we're dealing with. So don't tell us to get into negotiations and don't tell us to stop fighting because that's not on the table. And you know, eventually, if you just look at the size of these countries and the size of these armies, it's very clear that the Russians have a lot more tanks than people, just a ton more missiles, a ton more planes, and eventually the Ukrainians will cease to, you know, it'll be a Pyrrhic victory. They'll keep the Russians from taking the whole country, but it'll cease to be the country that we want it to be, to emerge as a, you know, Western, healthy country with a democracy and an economy and manufacturing. And so every year that this thing goes on, the Russians are just destroying the infrastructure and then sort of the will of these people and killing a lot of them. So, you know, they're just begging for, like, don't stop saying, you know, time is on our side, it's not. And they're like, stop saying, you know, as long as it takes, just say, we'll give you as much as it takes to win as quickly as possible. And I don't think that's where the Biden administration is. And that's the reality the day after Joe Biden leaves Ukraine.
So in talking with these senators and with these other world leaders, I'm wondering if they understand that it seems like besides us, you have the UK giving $4 billion. Is Germany doing what they should? Is France doing what they pledged to do? What about, is everyone stepping up like they have to?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we were in Germany. There were a ton of European officials there. You know, they're doing more, okay? There's no doubt that they're doing more than they were doing. But man, they're not doing as much as they could. Good example is the German tanks. For months, you know, they're like, give us the tanks. The hordes of murdering criminals are coming to rape and kill our children. Can we please have the tanks to have a chance of stopping them? And for months, the hand-wringing. And finally, the Germans said, well, if the Americans aren't going to give the tanks, then we're not going to give them. So Biden had to, like, you know, say that he was going to give them American tanks, which are not going to be there till next year, by the way, just to unlock the Germans, giving them the tanks that they could have today or they could have had yesterday if they hadn't gone through this months of this nonsense. And that's the kind of ridiculousness that the Germans and the French are engaged in. It's all of this crazy, you know, debate over what missile is too provocative and what missile is not too provocative. And as they debate, more Ukrainians are dying and their position is actually getting weaker. So, you know, the bottom line is that the Europeans are only going to do what the Americans do first or the Americans tell them to do. I mean, for better or worse, we are the most powerful country in the world and we have the only ability to lead this international coalition. But my take is that the Biden administration is prioritizing unity with Germany over unity with Kyiv, right? It's like they want to stay close to the Germans to keep this NATO group together, even if that means telling the Ukrainians they can't have the things they say they need to survive. And I say that they should have prioritized more unity with Kyiv and then tell the Germans to do more, and maybe that would be a better result, but that's not the way that this administration thinks.
Who's leading the thought process? Is it Blinken? Is it not Austin, I'm sure, but Who's the one who is it? Jake Sullivan? It says, Mr. President, this is what we should be doing.
Right. I'll tell you honestly, the lawmakers in both parties and the Ukrainians believe that this is essentially Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, running the show, and that the president agrees with him, and that Secretary of State Tony Blinken would, if he was in control, would be advocating a more aggressive policy on a number of fronts, including providing them the missiles and some of the other stuff that they say they need. Maybe not the planes, because the planes, again, is complicated and it takes a few months. I still think they should give them to them, but we're talking about the things that we have, that we could give them right now that would save lives and kill more Russians, and that's a lot of ammunition. That's the longer range missiles and the drones and stuff like that. So I think that, basically you have a division of realists and sort of small L liberal internationalists, and Blinken is on the latter and Jake Sullivan's on the former, and right now the realists are winning the day. That's really tragic for the Ukrainians, who are don't care about any of the internal politics. They just want the things to save their lives.
And they can't afford to alienate us. And if they come out and show the frustration that I hear in your voice, that might hurt them. Even though we're all in on this. And the president's future, how's he going to run on this? If Ukraine collapses while he's trying to get 4 more years, or any Democrats trying to get 4 more years, it'll be devastating. Even if you want to be selfish and think of politics, I don't think that way. But even if you are a politician, you know that if this thing collapses, you think Afghanistan was bad. This would be catastrophically more impactful.
Right. The politics is super interesting, Brian. You're right to focus on them, because if you think about it, when we get close to the presidential election, they're going to want to run on this, okay? So what end state do they want when that all happens? And I think the Biden people are calculating that they want to get to a negotiation so that they can say that they made peace, right? And so that's why they're trying to arm the Ukrainians just enough to tie, because they figure that's the best way to get them to a place where they'll sit down with the Russians, so that when the Americans go to the polls, it won't be, people dying in the streets. It'll be in the middle of negotiations or something like that. Now, the Ukrainians don't agree with that, because they don't think that's possible in the next 2 years. So they want to win so that the war would be over and they could live and, start to rebuild their country. That would also be a win for the Biden administration, but the Biden people don't have faith in the Ukrainians to get that done. And that's been the problem this whole time. I remember a year ago, when the Russians first attacked, I had senior Biden administration officials tell me, listen, Josh, this is going to be over in a few days, maybe a few weeks, and, the Ukraine's about to get slaughtered, and they're going to get crushed, and we better not prolong it. And then they realize that the Ukrainians actually care about their country and their way of life and their democracy and their freedom, and they're willing to die for it. And, that should have changed the Biden administration's approach to, okay, let's not push them to make a deal that won't stick, so that we can say we kind of fixed it, and then leave it for another day to actually fix it. That this is the chance. This is the chance to fix it once and for all. And the only way to do that is for the Russians to suffer an actual defeat.
Yes, and they've earned that defeat. They have no organization. They have no leadership. They have no experience. They don't really have good weapons. They certainly don't have motivation. They earn the humiliation that anyone who's watching these results would conclude. I mean, they've lost 200,000. I think it's pretty accurate, pretty widespread belief. 200,000 casualties, 60,000 dead amongst them. They've had hundreds of thousands leave their country rather than fight for their country, let alone the money that left when they could, because they knew the country was going backwards. Can I go to another area of expertise, and that's China? This Wang Wenbin, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, instead of being contrite and wanting to talk, they were bragging, according to your story, about saying that it was the Americans that wanted to talk, and it was we that asked for the conversation, and they instead turned around and go, we want our balloon back, we want you to put it together first, and then they went and sounded off in front of the world like arrogant idiots, which is to our advantage.
Well, yeah, the one good thing you could say about the Chinese Communist Party is that they're so cocky and so belligerent and so obnoxious at times that they're overreaching, that there's a backlash, and that's what I saw anyway, during 3 days in Munich, because here comes Wang Yi, who's just been promoted to be the top diplomat, the top foreign policy guy in that whole country, and, he had a real opportunity. Just think about it. I mean, 3 years ago we were all at Munich, everyone was worried about China. Now all people care about is Russia. But he won't even say that China still believes that Ukraine has a right to exist as a country, which is something that the Chinese at least used to say a year ago. He won't say that. And then he says the Americans should apologize for the balloon, which again is sort of funny, but it's gaslighting. But some people will be like, oh yeah, that sounds right. And then he says the Europeans should join with China and move away from Washington. And the Europeans are kind of like, can be squishy on this whole China thing, if we're being honest. So the German guy who's interviewing says to the Chinese